The bedroom was too large for one person. White marble floors reflected the glow of crystal chandeliers, scattering light across walls lined with silver silk panels. The bed in the center looked less like something meant for rest and more like a throne wide, immaculate, layered in ivory sheets that no one had yet disturbed. The scent of fresh roses lingered heavily in the air, almost suffocating in its sweetness. Elara Vale sat at the edge of that bed, her spine straight, her hands folded in her lap, her bridal veil still cascading down her back like a waterfall of lace. The diamonds around her neck felt heavier now than they had an hour ago. Every jewel seemed to press against her skin, as if reminding her that she no longer belonged to herself. Across the room, near the tall arched window that overlooked the city skyline, stood her husband. Adrian Vale didn't look at her. His black tuxedo jacket had been discarded over a chair. His sleeves were rolled neatly to his forearms, revealing sharp lines of muscle beneath skin too steady for a man who had just married a stranger. One hand rested in his pocket. The other held a glass of untouched whiskey. The city lights reflected in the window before him, turning him into a dark silhouette against gold and steel. He hadn't said a word since they entered the room. Elara watched him, waiting for something, anything. A glance, a sigh, even irritation would have been something human. Instead, he acted as if she were invisible. The silence stretched until it began to ache. Her fingers tightened in her lap, brushing against the silk of her wedding gown. She remembered when she had once sketched gowns like this in her art notebooks, imagining fairy tale endings. Back then, marriage had looked like soft laughter and shared secrets. Not this. Not a stranger who wouldn't even turn around. Her throat tightened, and the memory came back with merciless clarity. The dining table at her parents' house had felt much smaller than this room. The paint on the walls had been peeling near the corners. The ceiling fan had made a faint clicking noise every few seconds. It had been an ordinary evening until her stepfather cleared his throat and avoided her eyes. "Elara," he had said, folding his hands together as if discussing something trivial. "There is a solution to Mia's surgery." Her heart had leaped at the word solution. Her cousin had been in the hospital for days. Doctors had mentioned transplant lists and impossible costs. She had barely slept thinking about it. "What is it?" she had asked. He had inhaled slowly. "A family has offered to cover all expenses." Relief had surged through her, brief, bright, blinding. "In exchange for something," he added. The relief died instantly. Her mother's gaze had dropped to the table. "What exchange?" Elara had whispered. Her stepfather had finally met her eyes. There had been no cruelty there, just calculation. "They want you to marry their son." The words had hung in the air like smoke. She had laughed at first, a small, disbelieving sound. "That's not funny. It's not a joke." Her chest had tightened. "You're asking me to marry a stranger. We're asking you to save your cousin's life." Her eyes had turned to her mother, then her safe place, her comfort. "Mama," she had pleaded. Her mother's lips had trembled, but her voice had been steady. "You owe us, Elara." The sentence had cut deeper than any scream could have. "You owe us for raising you, for feeding you, for educating you. Johnson took responsibility for you when he didn't have to." Elara had felt something fracture inside her. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a quiet crack. "I never asked to be a debt," she had whispered, but the decision had already been made. Now she was here, sold for salvation. Her eyes drifted back to Adrian's rigid frame near the window. She tried to understand the hatred she had glimpsed earlier during the ceremony, during the vows, during the photographs where his hand had hovered at her waist like touching her cost him something. What had she done to him? Why did he look at her as though she had stolen something? Finally, he moved. He set the untouched glass down and turned around. For the first time that night, his gaze met hers fully. It wasn't anger. It was colder than that. Resentment. His eyes scanned her bridal gown, her trembling fingers, her veil. Then they lifted to her face. "You look nervous," he said flatly. She swallowed. "I think that's normal." A humorless smile ghosted across his lips. He walked toward her slowly, each step echoing against the marble floor. He stopped a few feet away, not close enough to touch, but close enough for her to feel the distance deliberately maintained. "You should understand something clearly," he said, his voice smooth and controlled. Her heartbeat thudded in her ears. "This marriage," he continued, "is a transaction. Nothing more." Her fingers dug into the silk. His eyes hardened further. "Don't expect me to treat you like a wife." The first morning in the Vale mansion did not begin with sunlight. It began with silence. Elara woke before dawn, her body stiff from sleeping on the very edge of the enormous bed. At some point in the night, Adrian had left. The other half of the mattress was untouched, smooth as if no one had ever belonged there. The air still carried the faint scent of his cologne, sharp and distant, like something that passed through but never stayed. For a moment, she lay still beneath the embroidered sheets, staring at the ceiling painted with delicate gold patterns. The weight of the previous night pressed against her chest. Transaction, nothing more. The words replayed in her mind, colder now in the quiet morning. She forced herself to sit up. If this was her new life, she would meet it standing by the time she stepped into the dining hall, dressed in a simple cream dress instead of the heavy bridal gown. The long mahogany table was already set for breakfast. Silver cutlery gleamed beneath crystal lights. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the sprawling gardens outside. Everything looked polished, controlled. Perfect. Adrian was already seated at the head of the table, scrolling through something on his tablet. His expression did not change when she entered. She paused for a heartbeat before taking a seat halfway down the table. Not too close, not too far. The distance felt symbolic. "Good morning," she said softly. He did not look up immediately. When he did, his gaze swept over her without warmth. "You don't need to pretend here," he replied. She blinked. Pretend. To be polite. To be hopeful. To be anything more than what this is. The words were not shouted. They were delivered calmly, as if he were explaining company policy. Elara inhaled slowly, refusing to let her voice shake. "And what exactly is this?" He set the tablet down at last. "An arrangement. You get financial security for your family. I secure my position in this company. We coexist. We stay out of each other's way." The casual cruelty of it stunned her more than anger would have. Before she could respond, a woman's laughter echoed faintly from his phone lying beside the plate. Bright, intimate, familiar. Adrian's jaw tightened for a fraction of a second before he flipped the phone face down. Elara felt it then. The invisible presence in the room. Someone else existed in his world. Someone who did not wear a veil or forced vows. He rose from his chair without finishing his coffee. "You will attend the charity gala with me tonight," he said, already turning away. "Smile, say little. Do not embarrass me." Her fingers curled slightly around her napkin. "I never intended to." He paused near the doorway, not looking back. "You already have." The words lingered long after he left. Later that afternoon, while wandering through the vast corridors of the mansion, Elara noticed something strange. Portraits lined the walls. Generations of the Vale family stared down in oil-painted authority. Yet there was no space prepared for her. No photographs from the wedding. No framed smiles. It was as if her presence had not been officially acknowledged. A maid approached quietly and handed her a small velvet box. "Mr. Vale asked that you wear this tonight." Inside lay a diamond necklace. Breathtaking and cold, Elara closed the box slowly. As evening descended and the mansion prepared for the gala, she caught her reflection in the mirror wearing the necklace. She looked every inch the billionaire's wife, elegant, composed, untouchable, but beneath the diamonds, beneath the silk, beneath the practiced calm, a question burned louder than before. If this was only a business deal, why did Adrian look at her as if she had stolen something from him? And why did it feel like the real reason had nothing to do with money at all? The gala hall shimmered like a kingdom built from glass and ambition. Chandeliers dripped light from ceilings painted in gold leaf, while orchestral music floated through the air in controlled elegance. Every guest wore power like a tailored suit. Every smile concealed negotiation. Elara stepped into that world on Adrian's arm, feeling the weight of 1,000 curious eyes tracing the outline of her existence. Cameras flashed. Whispers followed. The new Mrs. Vale had arrived, and no one knew quite what to make of her. Adrian's grip on her arm was firm but impersonal, guiding rather than holding. His posture radiated authority, his expression carved from stone. Elara moved beside him with quiet composure, her chin lifted, her gaze steady. She could feel the diamond necklace at her throat, like a reminder that she had been dressed for display. When someone approached to congratulate them, Adrian responded with effortless charm, introducing her in a voice smooth and practiced. "My wife." The words sounded correct, yet empty. As the evening unfolded, Elara began to notice something unsettling. Conversations quieted when she passed. Women observed her with measured curiosity. Men looked at Adrian as though waiting for a signal. She sensed she was not merely being observed but evaluated. It was as if the room already knew something she did not. She excused herself politely and drifted toward the balcony for air, the cool night breeze offering a fragile relief from the suffocating grandeur inside. From that quiet vantage point, she saw her husband below in the courtyard, speaking to an older man whose presence commanded silent respect. The resemblance was unmistakable. Sharp jawline, controlled gestures. The elder Vale. She could not hear the words exchanged, but she saw the tension in Adrian's shoulders, the restrained anger barely concealed behind civility. Then she saw something else. A photograph was handed to Adrian. Even from a distance, she could see the color drained slightly from his face. When he returned inside, his composure was intact, but something darker flickered behind his eyes. He approached her slowly, his gaze searching her face as though measuring truth against suspicion. Without warning, he reached into his jacket and produced the photograph. He held it before her without explanation. It was an image of her taken weeks before the wedding, standing outside a hospital, speaking to a man. Her stepfather. Her pulse spiked. The angle suggested secrecy. The caption printed beneath it read, "Private meeting before engagement, confirmation." Adrian's voice was low but cutting. "Did you think I would not investigate the woman my family forced me to marry?" Elara's breath caught. That meeting had been the night her stepfather had begged her to agree to the marriage. She had left in tears. There had been no conspiracy, no manipulation beyond what she had endured. Yet, in the wrong frame, it looked calculated. "I was told you agreed eagerly," he continued, his tone measured yet sharp. "That you understood the benefits." Her chest tightened. "I agreed because I was given no choice." He studied her face as though searching for cracks. In that moment the orchestra swelled inside, laughter echoing round them. But the world between them felt silent and dangerous. "My father believes you knew more than you claim," he said quietly. "That your family approached ours first." The accusation struck like ice water. Elara felt humiliation burn beneath her skin. Not because of guilt, but because she realized this marriage had been poisoned long before she stepped into it. Someone had rewritten her story. She met his gaze steadily, despite the tremor in her heart. "If you think I trapped you, then you do not know me at all." For the first time since their wedding night, uncertainty flickered in Adrian's expression. Not softness, not trust, but doubt. And doubt was more powerful than hatred. As the music rose and guests applauded some distant toast, Elara understood that the true battle had only begun. Someone wanted Adrian to believe she was not innocent, and until the truth surfaced, she would remain the enemy in her own marriage. The mansion felt colder after the gala, as if the walls themselves had absorbed the tension and were now exhaling it back into the air. Elara stood alone in the vast dressing room, carefully removing the diamond necklace from her throat. Her reflection in the mirror looked poised, almost regal, but her eyes betrayed the storm beneath. The photograph Adrian had shown her replayed in her mind over and over. The angle, the timing, the implication. Someone had wanted it to look like betrayal. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Before she could answer, the door opened. Sienna Laurent walked in as though she owned the space. She was breathtaking in a deliberate way, her gown a deep crimson that clung to her with effortless confidence. Her lips curved into a smile that did not reach her eyes. Elara had seen her earlier at the gala, laughing at Adrian's side before disappearing into the crowd. Now she understood why the air shifted the moment this woman entered. "You must be Elara," Sienna said, her tone light, almost playful. "I wanted to finally meet the famous wife." Elara straightened slowly. "I did not realize this room was open to guests." Sienna laughed softly. "I am not a guest here." The statement hung between them like a threat disguised as fact. She moved closer, her heels clicking against the marble floor. "You look exhausted. It must be difficult stepping into a world you were never meant for." Elara held her ground. "I am exactly where I am meant to be." For a second, something sharp flashed across Sienna's face. Then it was gone, replaced by amusement. "Do you know how long I have stood beside Adrian? Do you know how many years I supported him before this convenient arrangement appeared?" The words struck with deliberate precision. Elara's pulse quickened, but she refused to show it. "Then perhaps you should ask him why he married me." Sienna's smile faded slightly. "Oh, I did. He said it was necessary. He said it meant nothing. That hurt more than it should have." Footsteps echoed in the hallway, and Adrian appeared at the doorway. His expression hardened instantly when he saw them together. "Sienna," he said in a warning tone. She turned toward him gracefully. "I was only welcoming your wife." His jaw tightened. You should leave. For the first time, Elara noticed something beneath his cold composure. Not love, not warmth, control. He was trying to manage a situation that had already spiraled beyond his expectations. Sienna approached him slowly, her voice lowering. Are you really going to pretend I do not belong here? The room felt charged with something electric and dangerous. Elara watched as Adrian stepped back just enough to create distance between himself and Sienna. It was subtle, but it was there. You belong in the past, he said quietly. The silence that followed was heavier than shouting. Sienna's eyes flickered toward Elara, assessing, calculating. Enjoy the throne while you can, she whispered, before brushing past Adrian and leaving the room. When the door closed, the air shifted again. Elara turned toward her husband, her heart pounding not from jealousy but from realization. This was not just a marriage of convenience. This was a battlefield layered with history she did not understand. Adrian ran a hand through his hair, frustration bleeding through his controlled demeanor. For the first time since their wedding night, he looked almost human. She should not have come here, he muttered. Elara studied him carefully. Then why does she still have access? His gaze lifted to hers, dark and unreadable. For a brief moment, something unspoken passed between them. Not affection, not trust. Something deeper and more complicated. Because someone in this house still wants her here. The words were quiet, but they landed like thunder. The next morning did not bring peace. It brought headlines. Elara was alone in the breakfast room when she noticed the newspapers laid neatly beside Adrian's untouched coffee cup. Her name was not printed anywhere, but the implication was unmistakable. Vale heir secures strategic marriage amid internal restructuring. Anonymous sources suggest alliance strengthens board confidence. The article read like a corporate victory announcement, not a wedding. Her fingers tightened slightly around the edge of the paper. She understood then that she had not married into a family. She had been inserted into a strategy. Adrian entered moments later, already dressed for work, his presence filling the room before he spoke. His expression shifted when he saw the paper in her hands. For a fraction of a second, something like irritation flickered in his eyes. You should not read those, he said evenly. They are about us, she replied quietly. Or rather, about your company. He pulled out a chair, but did not sit. This marriage reassured investors. That is all you need to understand. There was no apology in his voice, no acknowledgement that her life had become a stabilizing tool for stock prices. And what do I need to understand about the board members who were celebrating at the gala last night? She asked gently. They looked less surprised than you. His gaze sharpened. What are you implying? I am asking why everyone seems to know more about my marriage than I do. Silence stretched between them. Adrian finally sat down but did not touch the coffee. His jaw tightened as if he were weighing how much truth she deserved. My father was facing resistance from several directors, he said at last. They questioned my leadership. They questioned my priorities. Because of Sienna, she said softly. His eyes snapped toward her. The fact that she spoke the name without hesitation unsettled him more than accusation would have. They believed she was a liability, he admitted. A distraction, and I am not. You are stability, he replied flatly. You come from nothing. You have no influence, no ambition in this world. You are safe. The words were not meant to wound, but they did. Before she could respond, a servant entered quietly and handed Adrian a sealed envelope. He opened it without concern, but as his eyes scanned the contents, his expression shifted. The air in the room thickened. "What is it?" Elara asked. He folded the papers slowly. "Someone is attempting to blackmail the company." Her pulse quickened. "About what?" "About you." The single word felt like a strike. He slid the paper across the table. It was another photograph, not the hospital one. This one showed her standing outside the Vale headquarters weeks before the engagement was announced. She had been there only once, accompanying her stepfather to what she believed was a charity meeting. The image was grainy but clear enough to suggest secrecy. The message beneath it was brief. "Tell the truth or the press will." Elara's breath caught. "I did not know they were planning anything that day. I thought it was about donations." Adrian studied her face carefully, searching for deceit. "My father claims your family approached ours first, that they proposed this alliance." "That is not true," she whispered. He leaned back slowly, eyes narrowing as suspicion warred with doubt. "Then someone is lying." The realization settled heavily between them. This was no longer about resentment or wounded pride. This was about power and manipulation far beyond their control. Elara felt something shift inside her. Fear, yes, but also clarity. She had entered this marriage believing she was a pawn in her family's desperation. Now she understood she might be a pawn in something far larger. Adrian rose abruptly, tension radiating from him. "Until I know who is behind this, you will not leave the mansion alone." It was not said gently. It was not said as concern. It sounded like an order. She lifted her chin despite the unease crawling through her veins. "Am I your wife or your prisoner?" He held her gaze for a long moment, conflict flickering in his eyes before the cold mask returned. "Right now," he said quietly, "you are the center of a war you do not even understand." The storm began just after. Midnight thunder rolled across the sky with a force that rattled the tall glass windows of the mansion. Rain lashed against the marble terraces and spilled over the garden statues, like a warning from something ancient and uncontrollable. Inside, the lights flickered once, then twice, before the entire east wing of the house plunged into darkness. Elara woke with a sharp intake of breath. For a moment, she did not know where she was. The room was swallowed in shadow, the elegant furniture reduced to silhouettes. Another crack of thunder tore through the night, and instinctively she pulled the silk covers tighter around herself. She had never liked storms. Not since she was a child and lightning had struck the old oak tree outside her bedroom window, splitting it in half while she watched from beneath her blanket. A loud, metallic sound echoed somewhere down the corridor. The backup generators had not activated yet. The silence that followed was heavier than the thunder. She forced herself to sit up. You are not a child anymore. But the darkness felt different in this house. It felt watchful. She slipped out of bed and moved toward the door, her bare feet silent against the cold marble. The hallway beyond was dim, lit only by occasional flashes of lightning cutting through the tall windows. Shadows shifted with each burst of light, turning familiar spaces into something unsettling. Another crash of thunder made her flinch, and without thinking, she moved toward the only place that felt less lonely. Adrian's private, study. The door was slightly ajar. A faint glow flickered inside. He was there, seated behind his desk, the room illuminated by a single emergency lamp. Papers were spread before him, his expression tense and focused. He looked up when he sensed her presence. For a split second, something like surprise crossed his face. "You should be in your room," he said. "I woke up when the power went out," she replied quietly. Her voice betrayed more than she wanted it to. He studied her more closely now. The storm roared again, and the glass windows trembled under the force of wind. She did not realize how close. She had stepped into the room until another flash of lightning brightened the space, and instinctively she moved nearer to him. He noticed you are afraid of storms, he observed. It was not mockery. It was fact. She hesitated before answering. I do not like losing control. The statement lingered between them. Outside, the wind howled, and suddenly the lamp flickered violently before going out. The study fell into complete darkness. The silence that followed was suffocating. Then she felt it. His hand around her wrist. Not harsh, not forceful, just grounding. Stay here, he said quietly. She could feel the warmth of his palm through her skin, steady and real in the pitch black. Her breathing slowed without her permission. For the first time since their wedding night, the distance between them vanished. Another bolt of lightning lit the room briefly, and in that fraction of a second she saw his face up close. The cold mask was gone. In its place was something more complicated. Concern, frustration, conflict. You are not as calculated as I thought, he said softly, almost to himself. And you are not as heartless as you pretend to be, she replied before she could stop herself. The honesty startled them both. Footsteps echoed faintly in the hallway. Adrian's grip tightened slightly. We are not alone, he murmured. The realization sent a chill down her spine that had nothing to do with the storm. The East Wing had no staff quarters. No one should have been there at that hour. Another sound followed. A door closing somewhere in the dark corridor. Adrian released her wrist and moved toward the desk drawer, retrieving something metallic and heavy. When lightning struck again, she saw the outline clearly. A handgun. He positioned himself between her and the doorway without hesitation. The storm outside raged violently, but inside the greater danger felt close enough to breathe in that moment. Elara understood something with terrifying clarity. The war Adrian had warned her about had already reached their home. The sound in the corridor did not repeat. For several long seconds, the only thing Elara could hear was the storm battering the mansion and her own pulse pounding in her ears. Adrian stood motionless in front of her, the gun steady in his hand, his body a shield without hesitation. The darkness seemed to breathe around them, heavy and watchful. Another flash of lightning tore through the sky, illuminating the doorway, empty. But the feeling remained. Adrian moved first, slow and controlled, stepping into the hallway with silent precision. Elara stayed close behind him despite the tremor in her chest. The marble floor was cold beneath her bare feet as they advanced down the corridor. Every shadow felt alive. They reached the end of the hall where a side door stood slightly open. It led to a private archive room rarely used by staff. The lock had been tampered with. Adrian pushed it open carefully, scanning the interior. No one but drawers had been pulled open. Cabinets disturbed. The backup generators hummed back to life, suddenly flooding the corridor with light. The shift from darkness to brightness made the scene clearer and more disturbing. Papers were scattered across the floor. A file cabinet hung open with folders partially removed. Adrian stepped inside, lowering the weapon but not his guard. He crouched and picked up a folder that had fallen. His jaw tightened. Elara moved closer despite herself. What is it? He held up the document. It was labeled Personal Background Assessment. Her name was printed at the top. Her stomach dropped. Someone had accessed the internal investigation his family conducted before the wedding. Financial history, education records, family assets, and more. There were handwritten notes in the margins. Not Adrian's handwriting. Not his father's either. One line was circled in red ink. Cousin heart transplant. Verified urgent. Another note scribbled beneath it read verify independently. Adrian's expression changed. Not anger. Something sharper. He flipped through additional pages quickly, scanning until he found a sealed envelope that had been torn open. Inside was a medical report. He read it once. Then again, his eyes darkened. Elara, he said slowly, his voice losing its cold edge. Did you ever see official documentation about your cousin's surgery? Her mind raced back to that night at the dining table, to her stepfather's solemn tone, to her mother's trembling voice. No, they told me it was urgent, that there was no time. Adrian handed her the report silently. The words blurred for a moment before she forced herself to focus. The document was dated 3 weeks before the wedding. It stated clearly that the patient had been stabilized and was responding well to medication. Surgery had been postponed indefinitely, pending further evaluation. Her hands began to shake. This says she did not need an immediate transplant, she whispered. Adrian's jaw clenched so tightly a muscle flickered beneath his skin. Which means the timeline your family presented was false. The truth hit her like a physical blow. She had agreed to marry a stranger, believing a life depended on it, believing she was choosing sacrifice over selfishness. Her vision blurred. They lied to me, she said, barely audible. Adrian stood slowly, something fierce awakening behind his eyes. Someone wanted this marriage more than you did. Another realization followed, colder and more dangerous, and someone inside this house is helping them. The room felt smaller suddenly. The scattered papers were no longer just evidence of intrusion. They were proof of a coordinated manipulation. Elara looked at Adrian, truly looked at him, and saw something different in his gaze now. The hatred was gone. In its place burned something protective and volatile. You were not a pawn in your family's desperation, he said quietly. You were placed here. A crack formed in her composure as the weight of betrayal crushed her chest. Everything she believed about that night collapsed. Her mother's words, "You owe us," her stepfather's urgency, the sacrifice she thought she was making, it had all been engineered. And the most terrifying part was not that she had been sold, it was that she might have been chosen. Sleep did not come that night. Elara sat by the tall window of her bedroom long after the storm had faded into a distant drizzle. The city lights shimmered below like a world untouched by betrayal. Her hands rested motionless in her lap, but her mind refused to be still. Every memory of her family now felt contaminated. Every tear she had shed over her cousin's supposed emergency now felt manipulated. She had not sacrificed herself. She had been maneuvered. The quiet knock on her door came just before dawn. She did not turn when Adrian entered. She could sense him there, the air shifting subtly with his presence. He did not speak immediately. For the first time since she had known him, he seemed uncertain. I verified the hospital report, he said finally, his voice low and steady. The transplant was never scheduled. The surgery was never critical. Her throat tightened, but she kept her gaze fixed on the city. So it was all a lie, yes. The single word felt like a blade sliding deeper. He stepped closer, stopping a careful distance behind her. I traced the original contact between our families. Your stepfather did not approach mine directly. She turned slowly now, searching his expression. It was my father, Adrian continued. He initiated the meeting. The room seemed to tilt. My father needed to secure his position with the board, he said, his jaw tightening. He needed to remove Sienna from the narrative, and he needed a wife for me who could not threaten his authority. Understanding dawned with cruel clarity. Someone without power, she whispered. Someone whose family would not fight back. Silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. Adrian's gaze darkened. Your stepfather agreed quickly. Too quickly. Her breath caught painfully. He sold me. The word hung in the air, raw and undeniable. Adrian did not contradict her. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The weight of manipulation, corporate ambition, and family betrayal settled heavily in the room. Finally, she stood, moving past him toward the center of the room. Something inside her had shifted. The grief remained, but beneath it a new strength was forming, quiet and resolute. I want a divorce, she said. The words did not tremble. Adrian froze. You cannot mean that, he replied, though his voice lacked its usual authority. I did not agree to be a strategic pawn in your father's game, she said calmly. I believed I was saving someone. I was wrong. I will not stay in a marriage built on lies from both sides. His expression hardened, but there was something else beneath it. Something that looked dangerously close to panic. You think leaving solves this, he said. It does not. It makes you vulnerable. I was already vulnerable, she answered. At least outside this house, I will be honest. He stepped toward her, closing the distance that had defined them since the wedding night. You believe I am the same as him. She met his gaze directly. I do not know what you are. The admission struck deeper than accusation. For a moment, his composure fractured. I did not know about the false medical urgency, he said, his voice lower now. I believed you entered this marriage willingly for the money, and you hated me for it, she said quietly. Yes, the honesty between them felt like exposed wire. I was wrong, he added after a beat. Those words were not easy for him, but they were not enough. Elara inhaled slowly, steadying herself. I will not stay here waiting to see whether you choose to be different from your father. One, choose myself. The resolve in her tone was not defiance. It was self-preservation. Adrian studied her as though seeing her for the first time, not as an arrangement, not as a stabilizing asset, but as a woman who had been wronged and still stood upright. You are asking for freedom, he said. I am reclaiming it. Outside, the first light of dawn broke across the skyline, pale and unforgiving. For the first time since their wedding night, Adrian did not look at her with hatred. He looked at her like he was afraid to lose something he had only just begun to understand. The announcement came before she could leave. Elara had packed only one suitcase, not because she owned little, but because she refused to carry anything from a life built on deception. The morning air was sharp as she stepped into the grand foyer, the marble floors echoing softly beneath her heels. The staff avoided her gaze, sensing tension that had settled heavily over the mansion. Adrian was not there to stop her. That hurt more than it should have. Just as she reached the doors, her phone vibrated. A notification from every major news outlet flashed across the screen. Vale Air secures permanent leadership after unanimous board vote. She frowned. Permanent. Her heart pounded as she opened the article. Adrian Vale, appointed Chief Executive Officer, effective immediately. Announcement followed emergency board meeting late last night. His strategic marriage cited a stabilizing factor in investor confidence. Her breath caught. He had secured the position, but the timing made her uneasy. A black car pulled into the driveway abruptly. Not hers. Not one of the usual company vehicles. The rear door opened and Adrian stepped out, still in yesterday's suit, his tie loosened, his expression unreadable but intense. He walked toward her without hesitation. "You were leaving without saying goodbye," he said, his voice controlled but edged with something raw. "You secured what you wanted," she replied evenly. "There is no reason for me to stay." He stopped only a few steps away. "You think this is what I wanted?" "You have your company now," she said quietly. That was the condition. A muscle tightened in his jaw. The condition changed. She studied him carefully. When last night, the words carried weight. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I rejected my father's final demand." Her pulse quickened. "What demand?" "He wanted me to transfer your shares back to the board once I became CEO. He never intended for you to hold actual influence. He wanted you symbolic, replaceable." The coldness of that plan sent a shiver down her spine. "I refused," Adrian continued, "and I made it clear that any attempt to undermine you would be treated as corporate sabotage." She stared at him, searching for manipulation, but found none. "You chose that," she whispered. "Yes." Silence stretched between them, heavy but charged. "You risked your position," she said slowly. "I secured it without his conditions," he corrected. "There is a difference." The weight of his decision began to sink in. He had stepped away from his father's control, not for profit, not for leverage, for her. But before she could process it fully, another car pulled into the driveway. This one carried a familiar figure. Her stepfather stepped out, flanked by security guards who had clearly not invited him. Rage flared in Adrian's eyes instantly. "I did not call him," Elara said quickly. "I know," Adrian replied, already moving forward. Her stepfather approached with forced confidence. "We need to discuss certain misunderstandings," he began. "You will not speak to her," Adrian interrupted, his voice colder than steel. The older man's composure cracked slightly. "This marriage was beneficial to everyone, except her," Adrian replied. The confrontation escalated quickly. Accusations, legal threats, evidence of financial irregularities in the medical funds. Adrian had done his homework overnight. Elara watched the exchange with a strange detachment. For the first time since this ordeal began, she was not alone in the fight. When security escorted her stepfather away, the silence that followed felt like the end of something old and poisonous. Adrian turned to her slowly. "I cannot undo what happened," he said, "but I will not allow anyone to treat you as expendable again." The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable. She held his gaze, her suitcase still in hand. "This does not erase everything," she said quietly. "I know," he replied. For the first time, there was no power struggle between them, no calculated distance, only truth suspended in fragile balance. "You are free to leave," he said softly. "But if you stay, it will not be because you were forced." The choice lay entirely with her now. And for the first time since the night she was told she owed her family, the decision belonged to her alone. The suitcase remained untouched. Elara did not leave that morning, but she did not unpack either. The mansion felt different now. Not because the marble floors had changed or the chandeliers shone brighter, but because the balance of power inside its walls had shifted. Adrian had chosen to stand against his father and her stepfather in a single night. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like the beginning of something far more dangerous. 3 days later, the board meeting was scheduled to formally confirm Adrian's position as Chief Executive Officer. The entire Vale estate buzzed with preparation. Security was doubled. Lawyers moved in and out of private offices. Whispers lingered in corridors. Elara watched from the upper balcony as sleek black cars lined the driveway. Powerful men in tailored suits stepped out one by one, faces composed, eyes calculating. This was the real battlefield. Not emotional, not personal. Corporate war fought with signatures and leverage. Adrian stood in the center of it all. When he glanced up and saw her watching, he did not look away. An hour later, she was summoned unexpectedly. A member of the board requested her presence in the main conference hall. The room was vast, lined with polished dark wood and framed photographs of decades of corporate triumph. Adrian sat at the head of the table. His father sat opposite him, expression unreadable. The remaining directors watched with interest, sharpened by curiosity. "Elara Vale," one of them said smoothly, "as a shareholder, your signature is required to finalize today's restructuring." She stepped forward slowly, the weight of every gaze pressing against her skin. Documents were placed before her. She scanned them carefully. Then she saw it. A clause buried near the end of the agreement transferred a significant percentage of her shares into a trust controlled by Adrian's father. It would not strip her completely, but it would reduce her influence to symbolic status. She lifted her eyes. No one spoke. Adrian's father leaned back slightly, as though waiting. She looked toward Adrian. His expression darkened the moment he realized what she was reading. "This was not in the draft I approved," he said coldly. "It is a necessary safeguard," his father replied calmly. Emotions cloud judgment. "We must protect the company, protect it from her." The room felt tight, suffocating. Elara closed the folder slowly. "I will not sign this," she said. The silence that followed was electric. One of the directors raised an eyebrow. "You understand the implications?" "Yes," she replied evenly. "You underestimate them." She turned the document toward Adrian's father. "You engineered my marriage to stabilize your position. You manipulated my family. You attempted to use my presence as a shield. I agreed to stay because I believed I had a choice. I will not surrender that choice now." Her voice did not tremble. For the first time, the older man's composure cracked. "You forget your place," he said quietly. Adrian stood abruptly, his chair scraping sharply against the floor. "She does not have a place," he said, his voice controlled but lethal. "She has authority." He moved to her side without hesitation. "The clause is removed," he continued, "or this meeting ends." The board members exchanged uneasy glances. They had expected resistance, but not unity. After several tense moments, the amended documents were placed before Elara again. The clause was gone. She signed, not because she was told to, because she chose to. When the meeting adjourned and the directors filtered out, Adrian remained beside her in the now empty hall. "It is over," he said quietly. She met his gaze. "No," she replied softly. "It is beginning." Outside, reporters gathered at the gates, eager for statements about the new leadership. Cameras flashed. Headlines would follow. But inside the quiet hall, something far more significant had shifted. She had not been sold. She had not been claimed. She had stood in a room built to silence her and refused. Adrian stepped closer, his voice no longer cold, no longer guarded. "I hated you because I thought you were part of the trap," he said honestly. "I was wrong." She studied him carefully. "And now," she asked, "what do you feel?" He did not look away. "I feel like I almost lost the only person in this house who never tried to control me." The words hung between them, unpolished and real. For the first time since the night she sat alone in her bridal veil, Elara did not feel small. She felt powerful, and the choice to stay would no longer be about obligation. It would be about love.